I became a DJ through Trevor Fung, actually. He was a DJ at a bar in the West End of London called Rumours, and I was a fan of music, like a lot of people at that time. And I used to go with him to this bar. It was a very high-end, kind of trendy bar at the time, and I'd go with him, and I was a collector, an avid collector of let's say American music, because that's where it was all coming from. Buying imports, 12-inch imports, albums, and one night he was sick and he asked me to stand in for him, and I kind of never looked back. I really enjoyed the process of buying music and playing it, and that was it. My dad was in a skiffle group. Don't ask me to describe what a skiffle group is, but I was very much into music. I played the piano and the guitar, and grew up with my father playing the Beatles and Elvis and listening to Radio 1, and I always remember that on a Saturday night my dad would take my mum out and they'd get dressed up, and it was a really big deal. So, you know, as a 5-6-year-old kid just finally understanding, or the first time I understood what was going on, it was around me. So he wasn't a professional, but there was always music in and around the family. And I suppose without realising it, it was there, and that's how I got into it. Because when I left school, I wanted to be in a band, and my mum, which gave me the best piece of advice ever, said, no, you've got to get a trade. And I'm a fully qualified chef. I studied for 4 years as a chef. I went to day release college, passed my exams, and worked in restaurants and hotels. And then when I was 19, then I thought, well, I'm fully qualified, I'm going to try music and see what happens. I never really wanted to be a DJ. I actually always wanted to be an A&R man and sign bands and work in the studio, and still do. Just never signed anything any good. Still trying. So that's what I really set out to do, but just because I was a collector, liked buying music, liked playing music, and enjoyed seeing people have a good time, and I suppose that's how I fell into DJing. I like to give. I like to see people have a good time, and through music, I suppose I found my way as an 18-year-old kid. When you're that age, you think you can rule the world, and suddenly you find yourself in this position where you're playing music and you're seeing people have a great time, and you're trying to find your feet as a young man. And I suppose that was a very important, obviously it was a very important one aspect of my life in terms of how important it was playing in that bar. Did I, at that age, feel the power of what a DJ has? No, I mean, there wasn't that power at that time. I mean, that's now, that's how it works now. At that time, it was, as cheesy as it sounds, it was all about the music. There wasn't the big salaries, there wasn't traveling the world, there wasn't commanding a room of thousands. It was the passion, the desire, the love of buying and playing music. That never came into it until later on. For me, how I ended up in New York was a friend of mine, he had family there. We went for a 2-week holiday, and just the energy and the excitement and being in an environment where the music that I loved and bought in South London, where it came from, was overwhelming for me. We went to a club called Paradise Garage, as it was pronounced. We had False ID, and I had a picture of myself with Melody Maker magazine, and my friend had an NME magazine, and we were English, and we blagged our way in all the clubs. And I was just overwhelmed by it. I was like, this is where I want to be, this is what I want to do. So I came back, 6-7 months, finished my my apprentice, and then thought, I'm going. As I said earlier on, when you're that age, just turned 18, 19, you think you can really rule the world, you have no fear. So I was sleeping on the floor, I was a courier, I was making ends meet. I didn't care, whatever I had to do to be in this city which was the pulse and the heart of the music that I loved, and it went from there. It was a very, very, probably the most important time of my life. I wouldn't be here unless I lived in New York. It was a very important part of the character of the person that I am today. In terms of DJs who inspired me, I would say that Larry Levan, who was the resident DJ of the Paradise Garage, was hugely influenced on my career, and I was fortunate enough to meet him before he passed. Grandmaster Flash, who I was really nervous to meet when I met him, because he was a pioneer for me. Red Alert, Tony Humphries, WizKid. I mean, I was 7 at this time. It was, thinking about it, it was a great time for me, and very inspiring to see and listen and meet these DJs. I came back, I had to come back. I was a courier, I was sleeping on the floor, I was an illegal immigrant, and times had to change. And I missed my family. So it was 2 years, I came back, and I just was gonna make it happen no matter what. And I met this guy called Mel Medali, who had a small record company called Polo Records. I met guys called the brothers, Nick and Ian Titchener, who had a company called Rush Release. I met a bunch of people, Corey Robbins from Profile, so I ended up working at Rush Release. I was A&R for Polo. The first artist I signed was Will Smith, which was Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, and first record I signed, I did a remix of, and didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew what worked. I was in the studio, I was with an engineer and was pointing out things, and the record went to number 5 on the pop charts, and I was like, this is easy. Little did I know, you know, it wasn't, and from there got more and more involved. I was the head of Profile Records in the UK, I was running Def Jam in the UK. I was totally immersed in the music scene. At that time, in terms of how house music had developed, it was becoming more and more popular. There were records, there were labels. DJ International was a force at that time. Probably, arguably, the most important house label of the late 80s. And we found ourselves as people that were into music, and the English always have, you know, embraced new music and moved forward. And that's kind of our house raised its head. And I had a small club in South London. It was a very popular club at the time. So Tongi got in touch with me and said he knew that I'd worked for Rush Release. I'd toured the country in terms of promotion and knew the clubs. So he had this record, Jack Your Body, Daryl Pandy, I believe it was, and I took him on a tour of the UK, and everything was Jack Your Body at that time. It was every other song came out with those kind of phrases and words in. So that's how I found myself. Italian house music came along, and it started to become more and more popular. I was playing it as a DJ, and then that summer we went to Ibiza, and that was kind of the next chapter that changed my life and a lot of people's lives, and it exploded. Late 80s, 87, I think that was the moment that Ibiza changed a few people's lives. There was 2 friends of mine who'd been working there all summer, Ian Paul and Trevor Fung, were ahead of the curve. Never really got the praise and that they deserved, because I was working and gone there for my birthday and invited a bunch of friends, and it's been well documented many times. But I invited a couple of friends for my birthday party, and there was friends there, and Trevor got me this villa, and Trevor and Ian were constantly calling me going, "You need to come here, you need to see what's going on." So of course I went for that holiday, and as they say, the rest is history. There was a certain bunch of people that found themselves at the right time, the right place, and we experienced something that was incredibly moving, and even to this date people go there and see it. You know, it's the true mecca of electronic music. And from there it's moved to Vegas in America. Vegas is now the mecca for electronic music, and it's just starting. It's strange to see it, but now America has really embraced our culture in a big way, and Vegas over the next few years is going to be a very important part of the future of electronic music. And huge stars, Akon, I was speaking to him only a few weeks ago, and he said to me how Ibiza was a very important part of how he saw the light. Puffy, Dre, these people who are going now, the wonderful moments that you have by going to this island was the spirit. You felt free. It was very much an island where hippies from Europe would go to, and it had this special energy. And then there was a DJ from Argentina who played with no boundaries. In terms of music, in England at the time, you had rare groove, you had pop on Radio 1, rock lived in a different place. It was fragmented, but this DJ came to the table and saw and played music in a different way. The DJ's name at the time was Alfredo. He was the DJ at Amnesia. There was Caesar, who was the DJ at the time. The club was called Coup, it's now Privilege. Pepe. Those were like 3, 4 or 5 who were the main influential DJs. What I tried to do in terms of bringing back the spirit and energy of Ibiza to London was, I had a club. We would hire the club from the owner and do our own thing. So in terms of the music policy, I had a big say in what we did and how we did it. So I literally came back, and overnight we were playing hip hop and rare groove, and overnight I was just dropping rock records in and pop records, and everyone's going to me, "What are you doing?" You know, and because I had the freedom to do it, because if it failed, the club was over and it was the end of it. But I was passionately believed in it so strongly, and I had the elements from Ibiza, the likes of Ian and Trevor, who came back, and there was a small posse of people from Sheffield and from Manchester who would come down, who'd been to Ibiza and saw the light, as we would say in those days. And so quickly everyone else around us, because it was a club based on friends, started to get what we were doing, understanding where we were going, had gone to Ibiza. So it changed overnight. And then I wanted to share this. So I got in touch with Alfredo and said, "Listen, I'd like to bring you to the UK." I paid for his flight, I paid for his hotel, and I brought him over and introduced him to all the other people and said, "This is the guy who started it," or one of the guys who started it. The phrase super DJ, I think, came from a magazine called Mixmag. I don't really know too much about that. It was more a media-driven phrase, and it wasn't a case of there's a bunch of DJs all walking around thinking we're super DJs. No, not at all. we were just doing what we were doing and living it, truly living it in the moment. I mean, it was a blur to some extent, because it was so exciting and it went so fast, and you weren't looking at it from a money point of view. You weren't thinking, no, I'm going to be a super DJ. It was just a phrase that came from the media. In terms of clubbing, we were so inspired that we went from a small club in South London to one of the biggest venues in the United Kingdom called Heaven, where we convinced the owner or the manager to let us have a Monday night. And the club had held 2,500. There had never been a club on a Monday night where people were dealing at that size, and we had a bar guarantee, and we were two kids that we didn't have the kind of money we needed, but we ended up talking the manager into giving us a bar guarantee, so we didn't have to literally hire the place. We just had to guarantee that the bar would make X amount of money, and it didn't for 6 weeks. We owed them £12,000. £12,000 for a 19-year-old is an incredible amount of money at that time, and it still is an incredible amount of money. And I remember, looking at Ian and going, what are we going to do? We don't have this money. But on the 6th week, we turned it around. We broke even, and the manager, David Inches, saw something in us that, I don't know, maybe no one else saw in us, and it just exploded, because it was this spirit and energy that was so exciting. And people would come down every week. It would get bigger and bigger and bigger, and people were saying, you can't do a club in London for that size. And by the end of it, we didn't just have Spectrum in London. We had Spectrum in Manchester on a Monday night. At one time, with Time Out, we had a dance tent. We had a tent on the riverbank for 4,000 people. We had Heaven on a Monday night, 2,000 people, and we had Manchester with 1,500 people. And it was ridiculous how popular it had become so quick. In terms of Cream, I was aware of the resident DJ. And I always felt, from my time in South London and at Heaven and Future, that it was the way forward for me at that time, even though it wasn't the way the scene was going. Darren Hughes and James Barton and Jim King were three guys who saw my vision. Prior to Cream, I opened Ministry of Sound and was the resident every Friday night for 6 months. And I wanted to be a resident DJ. So I'd gone against the grain. These guys saw the vision. I put it out there that I wanted to be a resident, and they got it. And that's kind of how it started at that time. And I was a true resident in the sense that I was there every week. I would have literally like a general job. I would have 2 weeks off, 4 weeks. I'd have 4 Saturdays off in a year. It was such an exciting time for me. I developed a sound. I would introduce a record by turning the previous record off, playing a new record that I believed in from the beginning, and wouldn't mix into it at the end. I would showcase tracks. I would break music more so than I'd done at Ministry, and people would flock from all over the UK. It was, at the time, for me, it was the way forward. But I think that in terms of the scene, we realised as a scene that it was a step forward for everyone, not just myself. In terms of my personality, it was a team. It was nothing really to do with me in the sense of it wasn't just me. Darren Hughes, I would play on Saturday night. Monday we would be on the phone talking about the night, how we could improve it. I would judge it, mark it in terms of points out of 10. We would have our weekly conversations during the week and say, right, you know, let's do this, let's do that, let's bring decorations in, let's put on an act that no one had ever heard, but the song was hugely popular in the club. Amoeba Assassin, no one's really heard of them, but in Cream, their record was hugely popular. So we would try and always to improve it. Monday we would talk about how the night went. Wednesday, Thursday we would talk about how we would improve it. Friday we would generally have a conversation on what was going to go on the process of Saturday night. And Saturday I would slap up the bloody motorway, you know, in a car, 3 hours there and 3 hours back, or fly. And you know, and there was no airport, you know, in Liverpool, so you'd go to Heathrow, fly to Manchester and go across. So 9 times out of 10 you'd probably drive it, because it was, believe it or not, quicker. And it was great. It was really tiring, but it was amazing. It was well worth it for me. I realised how popular the night was becoming, not just me, but for the scene. I knew and believed that we were doing something that was different, for sure, absolutely. And we, as a collective, loved it because we were doing it for the right reasons. In terms of my remixing and where I went, the record industry embraced the club culture, and radio started to play alternative mixes of established bands, and I produced a band called Happy Mondays. I knew the structure and arrangement of mixing, and from playing instruments and wanting to get more and more involved in the studio and learning through Steve Osborne, who at the time was and still is a fantastic producer in his own right. I got more and more involved in remixing and producing, and started doing tons of remixes, and I believe had the right work ethic in terms of I wouldn't do it unless I knew it was the right song. Unless I know, and still to this day, I will not do a remix unless I know I can make it work on the dance floor. And that's probably why still to this day I'm doing remixing, or I've produced Madonna, and I've gone on to do scores, and through this work ethic of knowing it unless it works, don't touch it. And Island Records came to me and said to me, we want you to work on you too, and I was like, great, you know, I was a fan. And that opened a complete different door for my career, because I did 7, 8 remixes for the U2, but I did one in particular song called Even Better Than the Real Thing that became a bigger hit than the original. And then the band contacted me and said, we're going on a world tour, do you want to come and open for us in stadiums? I was like, yeah. I was like, fucking hell yeah. I was like, this is unbelievable. And they said, come. I was playing in Ireland and the band came to the show, and I remember being really nervous, and they invited me to the studio, and a relationship came out of it still to this point where, you know, I'll go and see them if they're in town, and they're great people, truly great people. Did I ever think I would see the world for a box of records? No, of course not. You're not doing it for those reasons. You're doing it, as I explained earlier, for the belief and passion as a person. And as cheesy as it sounds, that's what I was doing it, and that's what I do it for. The perks then were, and the perks are incredible now. I mean, from then, you're flying business class now, mainly private jets in terms of flying. There is a downside to that. 9/11 completely changed flying and travelling for everyone. The biggest perk for me is not necessarily the flying, actually, is learning, experiencing, seeing the world and meeting people. That's what I cherish about the whole thing. I remember I put out an autobiography a few years ago, and I had to sit there and talk about this subject, and the people that we've met around the world, and the friends that you've made and these friends you still have now, you know, it's probably the most rewarding part of the whole thing, because you can come and go to these countries, you can come and go to these places and see and learn, but it's the friends that you have there that mean the most. I never realised at the time how important the DJ would become. Probably my first experience of when I realised that things were changing, when I played main stage on Glastonbury, and then I played Spike Island with the Stone Roses. I played at Wembley Stadium opening for U2, and there was a show called Net Aid, which was after Live Aid, and I was playing between Bowie and Peter Gabriel, and I really got it then and realised how things were really changing for me. A few years ago I played at the Hollywood Bowl. I had a similar conversation where they were telling me I was the first DJ to play it, and I was explaining to them about our culture and the other DJs, and now they have an electronic night every year, and it's good for our scene. How you stay at the top of your field, in my opinion, is you be ahead of the curve. For me, I got to a point in my career where I've DJ'd in a lot of places and done obviously a lot of things, but the challenge for me was to take it further. So I got asked to score a movie called Swordfish with John Travolta, Halle Berry. It was like a $90 million movie, and I was really nervous. They flew me to LA and I had the meetings, and I knew I could do it. And I wanted the challenge, and I got in. That's my main job now. That's where I earn most of my money. I have a residency in Las Vegas. We do 3,500 people on a Saturday night. I'm there 2 to 3 Saturdays a month. We're changing the way America perceives electronic music. I say we because, again, it's a team. But you have to stay ahead of the curve. You have to embrace youth. You have to embrace technology, and it's good to give back. The pie's big enough for everyone. You will have your moment if you're good at what you do and you work hard. When you get your moment, that's when you have to stay on top of it and work hard. In terms of vinyl and the death of vinyl, however you want to call it, I embraced the change very early on, and I'll tell you, there was a DJ in Hong Kong called Alan Jewell. He was a good friend of mine. He was the first DJ I ever saw playing on CDs, and Pioneer came to me in the early days, and I helped Pioneer in terms of the movement from vinyl to CD. I had many meetings with Pioneer and was instrumental in that process, but I wasn't certainly. Alan Jewell was the one. I saw the light through this guy who was with DMC, and that's probably why I embraced it so easily. I love the sound of vinyl. I love vinyl. I was one of probably the last to change over, but I knew it was coming. It's much easier to spin on CD. The art goes. There's something special about pulling records out, of the looseness of it going out of the mix and working the record. CDs is quite sterile. It's, you know, if you're looking at it from a clubber's point of view and you're looking up and you see 2 laptops, in some respects, what are you doing? What's going on? But you embrace that, and with technology, it's getting more and more things are happening, and you will have the death of a CD. Listen, one of the biggest DJs, without doubt, the most popular night in Ibiza for the last 10 years has been Sven Väth's night on a Monday night. Monday night, 7,500 people. No one comes close to it in terms of the length, in terms of how long he's been doing it. He plays on vinyl, still to this day. So you don't judge a DJ by how he plays, whether it's vinyl, CD or whatever. You don't judge a DJ by that. It's what he plays, the music, how it sounds. So it's irrelevant in my opinion. 3 great shows. First of all, I'd say it's incredibly hard to sum up 3 great shows, but the first big show was Spectrum. Was when I went from small DJ to a bigger DJ. I would say, in terms of iconic shows that I will always remember, was opening for Madonna or U2, which was stadiums, and I suppose it is so many. Best thing about my life, in terms of my job as a DJ, and where I am, I'd say producing Madonna, working with U2, playing in stadiums, just the point of how far it's gone and how far I've pushed my own career. I've played Madison Square Gardens, I've played Wembley Stadium. I never, ever, ever thought that I could achieve that. The worst thing is you miss your family, you travel immensely, it's tiring, but that comes with it. You know, whatever job you do, that comes with it. The greatest thing ever is to see people enjoying what you do. You know, and this culture has become, it's a global culture. And my advice is always understand the business. I got ripped off like a lot of people, and my dad said to me, you know, it's called the record business. Understand it, learn about it, and I did. And it's a great business, or was a great business to be. It still is for me. I really, you know, I'm in Hollywood, living my dream, scoring movies, and I'm a kid from South London.
Caballeros, con ustedes, Mr.